So how competitive are you? Do you insist on winning? This could be numerous things, like when you're playing a board game or in the business world, school grades, cooking, your style, whatever it is. Do you insist on being number one? Are you the type who does all they can to finagle a deal? Is it your goal to not just do your best, but insisting on being the best? Like if you weren't number one, would you feel like a failure? Now, I'm not sure if there is a more competitive board game out there than Monopoly. Amen? I don't know if that deserves an amen or not, but yes. You probably have your own stories that center around this game. And sure, it is really cool that you can buy different versions, like the British version, and I'm told there's even an Australian version, and that every major city in the world seems to have their own version. But it doesn't matter if you're buying a property or properties on Park Place in New York City or on Old Kent Road in London, the goal is still the same. Become the wealthiest player by sending every other player into bankruptcy. Now, in our gospel story this morning, Jesus and his disciples, we learn, walk away from the crowd. Jesus desires to be alone with his closest disciples so he can teach them more privately. It wasn't the first time for the disciples to hear Jesus say he would be betrayed by folks who didn't agree with his good news, the gospel. And it wasn't the first time that they heard him say that he would be murdered and would rise again, become alive. But in this story, the writer notes that the disciples found this story not just perplexing, but they were afraid. They were so afraid they didn't want to ask Jesus to tell them more, to help them understand. So instead, they began to quibble among themselves who was Jesus' favorite disciple, or who was the most popular of the 12, maybe, with the other people who were following Jesus. Jesus didn't get involved in their argument until they arrived at the place they were staying. And as soon as, he sits down and he asks them about their argument, the disciples are a bit shocked, perhaps even embarrassed. They thought they had been discreet. I like how Jesus didn't shame them. Yes, he caught them in an argument. He lets them know that he was listening, but he uses this as a teaching moment. He sits down and he invites the 12 to join him, and it seems like in a very calm manner, he says, so you want to be great. You want to be in first place. You want to be highly regarded among your peers and maybe even in the world. Well, here's what you got to do. You got to be the least of all. If you want to be first, you're going to need to be last. And I imagine that there may have been one or two disciples who rolled their eyes and thought, there goes Jesus with his Jesus logic. He's not making sense. But Jesus continues and he invites a child to come and be with him. And as he welcomes this child, Jesus says, look at this child. Look out for all children. All children, if you care for all children, you will be great. Now, I imagine that this child, they're very small rooms, but it was in a home, and so maybe this child had wandered in, trying to see what was happening in that room, and I can imagine that there was a parent or a servant that was trying to coax the child out, and yet Jesus says, hey, come here, come sit right in the middle. Bringing the child right in the middle of the room. Because Jesus welcomed this child as a valued human being. If you welcome a child, if you welcome those who are on the margins, you are not only welcoming me, Jesus says, but my friends, you are welcoming God. Actually, it seems that Jesus was calling his disciples to do more than welcome, more than saying, hi there, nice to see you, glad you're here. But by bringing the child from the fringes into the center of the room, Jesus was helping the disciples, giving them a visual way to understand that our goal is to center people, to be centering people. That is our goal. To focus on people, that the welcome is more than a greeting at the door, that a welcome needs to include actions that prove that we see everyone as worthy, that we see everyone as beloved, valued, that we look them in the eye and that we listen to their story. In Jesus' day, children had little value, perhaps the littlest of value of all humans. No legal status, no rights, no ability to have self-agency, unable to decide their future. They were the lowest of the low in status, not valued enough to be included, and especially to be included in such a highly honored group. Even their caregivers, the women and the servants who were also viewed as unworthy, would view children as unimportant. In bringing this child into the center of the room, Jesus is telling us today that we will need to welcome all, even the lowest of low. You know, it can be easy for us to slip into playing Monopoly in real life, right? We don't have to play the game to know that we can just see how all around us in the news and even ourselves, we get to this place where, no, we aren't buying up all property and squeezing the rent from other players, but it's become easy for us to turn our backs on those who may embarrass us or make us feel uncomfortable. Or we may ignore the folks who society says they're a waste of time. And so we have developed in our culture and around the world ageism and ableism and sexism and phobias. But Jesus is calling us to a higher play, a higher game, if you will. We are called to welcome God into the center of our lives, into the circle. And we do that as we welcome the children and the foreigner, the person who may make our reputation sketchy, and we sit at the table with them, like the song that we just heard, and we help them belong. We allow them to welcome us, and we welcome them. And in doing so, we build a community. Because, my friends, each of us not only has a place at the table, but each of us has a purpose at the table. We are all valuable. There's a story from Southern Africa. An anthropologist had been studying the habits and customs of a tribe for many years. And when he finished his work, he had to wait for transportation that would take him to the airport for him to return home. He had always been surrounded by the children of this village. And so to help pass the time away, he proposed a game to play with the children. He bought lots of candy and sweets in the city. And he put everything that he bought into a nice basket and put a lovely bow on it, and then put the basket at the base of a tree. And then he had the children, step way back, and he drew a line in the dirt and told the kids to all line up behind that line, and that when he would make the sound, let them know that it was time to go, that they would race to the tree, and the first one there would have the basket of sweets. And so he made the signal, and he said, "Go." And he thought that they would rush to the basket. But that's not what they did. Instead, they took each other's hand, and together they ran to the prize. And they happily sat down and enjoyed the meal together, or the goodies together. The anthropologist was very surprised, and he said, "Well, why didn't you just want to be the first one to get to the basket?" And a little girl replied, "How can one of us be happy if all the others are sad? How can one of us be happy if all the others are sad?" Archbishop Desmond Tutu explains that Africans have a thing called Ubuntu. It's about the essence of being human. Ubuntu embraces hospitality, caring about others, being willing to go the extra mile for the sake of another. Desmond Tutu says, "We believe that a person is a person through other persons, that my humanity is caught up and bound up with yours, so that when I dehumanize you, I dehumanize myself. The solitary human being is a contradiction in terms," he says. "Therefore, we are called to seek to work for the common good, because your humanity comes into its own in community and in belonging." Our humanity is tied up in the community. That is what Jesus taught as well. As you and I, and as we as a congregation seek to place people in the center, if people are the reason why we do what we do, then we'll be working for the common good. As we seek to do all we can to express the worthiness of our neighbors, that their needs matter, we will not only welcome them, but as Jesus said, we'll be welcoming God. As we move away from pushing to get ourselves ahead toward a place of working for the common good. Let me say that again. As we move away from pushing to get ourselves ahead toward a place of working for the common good, a place that honors one another, a place that acknowledges that we all belong, then we will move from a competitive stance to one of true collaboration, where everyone belongs and everyone has value. Amen.